All right, so as we continue our discussion on human development, we're still kind of in the childhood range, and we spend a lot of time in this range, in this age range, because this is where most of our development comes from. All of our family values. If you looked at back at previous lessons, a lot of our cognitive development occurs in the childhood age range. So it's very important that we kind of understand exactly what all goes into that. As chapters 9 and 10 indicated, as we read through those, you saw a lot of correlations to genetic predispositions to development, right? Because if we have some kind of developmental delay or deformity in our brains, that may inhibit our language abilities or memorization or visual spatial or something. So we do spend a lot of time in this realm. And we will eventually move out of that into adulthood and aging an adult and death and dying after that. But today we're really the chapters 9 and 10 looked at growth and development, as well as cognitive development and psychosocial development as well. So there are a couple areas. I know it was a pretty broad spectrum of information that your book covered over 2 chapters. I'm going to really delve into just a couple of things. I'm going to start with autism spectrum disorder today, and hopefully, if I have time, we'll talk about ADHD. And the reason why I kind of bring these up is because early detection is key to understanding how a person is going to thrive later in life, helping them, giving them the tools that they need to thrive later in life. Because it wasn't until really around the 50s, 60s, and 70s that we started understanding that children don't really fit a cookie cutter mold. So in school, we can give them information. And back then it was the expectation that you learn what we give you. If you can't, then you either don't belong in school or you drop down to kind of a lesser class of students, a different class of students where different information is not fed nearly as quickly, if at all. So it wasn't until maybe around the 70s, late 70s, 80s, and even today, we're still progressing a little bit more further into understanding how these mental health issues and these cognitive developmental delays can really factor into a child's learning. And it's not as simple as you either get it or you don't get it. They may have different learning styles. They may be more auditory. They may be more visual. So helping the educators and caregivers understand what kind of child has what kind of learning ability is going to be crucial to transferring information, knowledge, and even life skills to them. Okay. All too often we see, especially in our prison system, people that have a variation of either ASD, autism spectrum disorder, or ADHD, and they probably were not given the proper tools early in life to deal with those, right? And if they were pushed, if they happen to be one of those unfortunate people pushed to the wayside, then that really affected how they grew up today. Okay, so very important that we kind of keep that in our focus, in our crosshairs. Is the goal of is early detection, intervention, and then transferring of some kind of skills so that they can be successful later. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you here as I kind of jot down some notes as we talk about this. Okay. All right, hopefully you're able to see my screen here, okay? All right, so autism spectrum disorder. It's going to be the first thing we're going to talk about. Now, autism spectrum disorder, you're going to hear me oftentimes refer to as ASD. Okay. As former military, I like acronyms. Okay. And actually, this is probably one of the most preferred acronyms as to say an autism spectrum disorder all the time, right? Like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You know, it's a long way to say just really the same thing, or PTSD, right? So we use a lot of acronyms in the field of psychology and mental health. So autism spectrum disorder is really a broad social disorder that affects the way that people communicate and interact with other people. And the reason I say it's really a broad disorder, and the reason that we call it a spectrum disorder, is because each person with autism spectrum disorder is affected a little differently. No two people with autism spectrum disorder are exactly the same. So we say that different people with autism spectrum disorder fall along a spectrum. Okay. So we may see something similar. You know, we may have like nonverbal, non-functional, or minimal functional, and we may have sociable. Okay. Now, prior to about 5 years ago, when the DSM-5 came out, DSM-4 categorized autism spectrum disorder. Actually, it had autism and Asperger's. Okay. Now, Asperger's, we kind of merged into autism spectrum disorder in the latest DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. It's kind of our Bible for diagnosing people with mental health or cognitive disorders. So prior to DSM-5, we looked at Asperger's as being kind of sociable, right? Higher functioning autism is what we would really call that today. So, which meant that they usually went undiagnosed, or they might have had some oddities and some issues that prevented them from relating to certain people, or in social situations, or even adapting certain life skills. But for the most part, they were undetected as far as having any kind of issues. So later on in life, we might say that they had Asperger's, or if they did have certain signs earlier on in life, we could probably diagnose them with Asperger's as well. But anyway, so ASD is along a spectrum, and it goes from like mild or minimal invasiveness all the way to kind of like severe. Okay. Severe or minimal. Minimal, what I mean is minimally affected, which means probably sociable, probably verbal, probably able to transfer life skills and put things together for the bigger picture. Okay. All right. So anyway, everybody with autism, they do have different experiences, and there are a few key signs that are common among people with autism spectrum disorder. And we're going to check these out so that we can understand a little bit more about what autism spectrum disorder is. So there are a few ways that that we could really categorize these common signs of the disorder. I'm just going to kind of do it this way. So what I'm going to just kind of list the key signs and just go in order. All right. So the first key sign is going to be communication and social. Okay. And the second one is going to be behavioral. And trying to think what the third one was. Let me get around to that third one here, as probably remember it as we're going along. So anyway, we'll write down all the behavioral signs, and then we'll kind of put trying to think what the third one. Oh, environmental stimuli. And I'll explain what each of these are as we go along here. Okay, so I'll start by looking looking at the first category here, which is communication and social signs. Okay, so I'm going to draw kind of a face here. All right. So I'm not really an artist, so I apologize. Oh, this is going to really be a disaster. I don't have great artistic skills. So anyway, I'm going to draw a face and maybe have like an expression of boredom. Okay, so maybe like, you know, again, apologize. So like heavy eyes, just kind of like a flat affect in their face, right? Um, So if you can imagine boredom, however that looks to you, just kind of use your imagination as to what a boredom would normally look like, but what it's supposed to be. So for someone with autism spectrum disorder, they might not really notice or pick up on facial expressions here and realize that this person is trying to indicate that they're bored, right? That's how we communicate, is through our body language and facial expressions. They might have trouble noticing these sorts of nonverbal cues and are often used when people chat. Or so someone with autism spectrum disorder may not might continue a conversation with this person and not really pick up on the fact that they're bored, right? And maybe many of you have kind of encountered this. People that don't pick up on social cues, you're talking to them and maybe they're looking off into space or checking their watch or their phone, and you continue to talk to them, right? I'm not saying, maybe some of you do that. Maybe some of you have had somebody do that to you. So if you can imagine, I know, especially in the mental health field, I see that a lot. I see autism spectrum disorder and people not being able to pick up on social cues. Probably many of you are making faces of boredom at me right now, and I'm still continuing to talk, right? So I'm not saying I have ASD, but it's just kind of what I do. I have to teach this stuff no matter what. So let's look at another verbal cue, right? So just to get a better idea. So maybe instead of being bored, this person might, I don't know, have some kind of defensiveness with them, and maybe defensiveness, maybe they're not drooling, but maybe a little bit more of a frowny face or bright eyes or something like that. It could be very similar to boredom, but maybe they're defensive. So let's maybe even like cross their arms or something. Okay. Again, apologize for the, not a great artist. That's why I didn't go to art school. I went into psychology. Okay. So hopefully that looks like arms crossed on your end. All right. So the way we sometimes we cross our arms when we're feeling defensive. We might be shutting people out to saying, I'm not listening anymore, right? And this might be the person's way of showing that they're getting defensive about something in the conversation. And again, for someone with autism spectrum disorder, they might not really see the arms crossing as a sign of defensiveness. So this nonverbal cue doesn't really indicate to them that this person here is feeling defensive. So they might continue on again with the conversation. Okay. And that could, why would that be a problem? Why do you think that would be a problem with sociability for that person?
They're unaware to what it means in, I guess, society.
Right. So what could that lead to as far as building like social support or holding down jobs or anything? What would that mean for that person, do you think, if it went unchecked? Like, can you imagine somebody in customer service or human resources being able to communicate? Like, if that's our means of communicating and holding down a job, right? That might be a problem for that person, right? So, learning skills earlier on, detection and intervention and transferring of skills is important when we are able to detect it. Okay. So anyway, so maybe we can kind of summarize this as trouble understanding emotions. Okay. And that's one of the that's one of the signs that we see with somebody with autism spectrum disorder. And again, keep in mind, ASD it's just that, it's a spectrum. So people may have different degrees of trouble understanding the behaviors of others. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. It varies a lot between people with the disorder. But you can imagine here, if somebody with autism spectrum disorder doesn't quite see and read emotions and behaviors of others, if they don't quite understand communication in this way, as people without autism spectrum usually do, well, this can get a little tricky for them to communicate, as we indicated, right? So for children with ASD, they may not quite know how to express themselves and communicate, or they need to, which I'll put here, trouble expressing. So not only detecting emotions, but also expressing themselves as well, right? And they have a difficult time communicating what they want. And we usually see this in behaviors. If anybody has known anybody with ASD, that usually shows up in fits of rage sometimes, because they don't know how to really verbalize. It takes them a little bit longer to verbalize what they want. So they might grab or scream because they don't really have any other way to get what they want, or ask for what they want. And for kids that are a bit older and have ASD, well, that's not really being able to see or read emotions for others, and not really being able to communicate in these sorts of ways themselves. This can make things tricky for them in connecting with people. And as we develop, we kind of looked along Erik Erikson's and earlier lessons, Erik Erikson's psychosocial development theories, that might produce a lot of problems, right? So what's that mean for trust versus mistrust, right? Or competency and independence. If they're not able to communicate and get what they want from their environment, that could be a very, very big problem for them. Okay. So sometimes for people with ASD, they might struggle to fit into a group of people, right? As we get a little bit more sociable in school, or they might maybe they just prefer to hang out on their own. We see that a lot. They tend to isolate, right? So if we move on to our next category here, any questions, or does anybody have anything to add about communication or social skills, or anything that they may have seen or experienced?
So I just want to add something. So my mom's one friend has a son, and they didn't think anything of him having autism or anything, but he was out practicing baseball with his dad because he was going to play t-ball. And his dad was like, put your hands behind your head, like whenever you hold a baseball. And he like dropped the bat and actually like put his hands like behind his head. So whenever he did that action, then they thought about getting him tested for autism, and he does have it.
Okay. Yeah. So multitasking and being able to follow directions might be a difficult time for them. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. So in those cases, what some interventions might be geared towards is helping them to effectively communicate and maybe give them practice at following directions a little bit more closely, right? And that's not to say that this can produce normal results, but we try and mimic normal results. We kind of, in these cases, and as you'll see with ADHD, it's not necessarily correcting their behaviors, because oftentimes that can be a very difficult, if not too impossible task. So what we really look at doing with ASD and ADHD especially is molding the environment to them. And giving them the tools that they need through their environment. So having a parent that understands what ASD is, and helping them to maybe spend a little extra time with them, because any of you that have kids, you know that no two of them are the same. I've got 4 of them, and I can tell you that what worked for my first one did not work for my second one. My third one, none of the previous 2 methods of parenting style worked for them. Every child is a little bit different. And if you have ADHD or ASD thrown into the mix of that can be an even bigger challenge for the parents. So helping the parents understand that you might need a little extra patience, you might need these skills to communicate, and not be so reactive, but just kind of helping them to understand what's happening might produce a better environment for them, right? So Thank you for sharing that once again. So we're going to move to our next category here, and we've got behavioral signs of autism disorder. So let's check out some of these. And let's see, what I'm actually going to do here is, let's see.
Professor,
Yes.
can I add something?
Yeah, you sure can.
So I have ASD and I struggle with empathy.
Okay. Okay.
Just like basically and understanding people's emotions and like struggle to connect with other people's emotions.
Okay. So, first of all, Caitlin, thank you for sharing that. With what I said here, kind of what really stood out as far as what I was communicating with some of these communication and social skills. What did you find?
With like that applies to me.
Yeah, or what you know of it. Yeah, sure.
So basically the trouble expressing yourself whenever I was a child, I still really have fits of rage. But as a child, I would get these really big fits of rage because I couldn't understand how to express myself.
Okay.
That really
Okay.
resonates with me.
And some of the interventions that, and again, thank you for sharing that, but some of the interventions there are kind of just breaking these, like if you have a goal of something that you want, correct me if I'm wrong, but if say you have something that you want to achieve or gain or obtain, instead of just going right to wanting that, they kind of add steps into recognizing what you want and figuring out ways and giving you the skill sets to achieve that through communication. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, there are different interventions to helping people with that. And, some people with severe, I have lots of clients that are kind of more on this end of the spectrum here. And, it's very challenging. It's very challenging for them to be independent, because maybe they don't know how to get up in the morning on time, or brush their teeth, or have any kind of self hygiene or self awareness. I'm sorry, not self awareness, awareness of what they need to do to interact with their environment, how to get money, how to go grocery shopping. So basic life skills are not really taught. They kind of just want what they want, and they get it when they can. And if they don't want it, then if they, for example, seeing bigger picture, knowing that they need to get a job to get money, to get food, to stay healthy and stay alive, right? That might be a problem for them because they don't really see the benefit of getting money. They just see that as being difficult. So more on the severe end of the spectrum, we're going to see less independency. They might have to have some kind of assistance with living and life skills. They may need some other additional resources, or they may need to actually live with somebody or live in a home that is geared towards helping them out. So that's more on the severe end. Now, more on the sociable end, we're going to see that we're going to see a lot more independence. We're going to see, just maybe a little bit of deficiencies in skills of expressing emotions, or detecting emotions, or expressing what they're going to meet their needs. But for the most part, as we get more along this end of the spectrum, we're going to see more independence, more functionality, more basic life skills, and seeing bigger pictures. So that's kind of what that looks like. And again, thank you for sharing that. So, so with respect to behavioral, we're going to look at, I'm going to make a little graph here, and I'm going to call this level of interest. On this side. And we're going to have kind of whatever our skills are here. So along the y-axis here, it's going to be considered level of interest, and we'll see, maybe I can use different colors here. So if we use maybe blue to draw what we might expect for kids, and we'll see like maybe even red here for, yeah, I'll explain all this. So what we might see for a kid with ASD, and let's kind of put a few different activities down here along our x-axis. So maybe we'll have something like, go back to color black here. We'll have maybe soccer, okay? We'll have horse riding. We'll have maybe cars. And maybe over here we'll have blocks. So for blue, this will be what we expect, right? Socially, right? Expected behaviors, expected level of interest. And then for the red, we'll have ASD. Now, again, this is going to vary. So we're not going to, I'm not going to say that any of these are greater than the other, but, you know, for the most part, universally, this is what we see. Okay. So we got, we have all these activities, and we'll look at different levels of interest that we might expect kids to have in these interests or in these activities. So maybe, for example, you know, we'll have, we'll start maybe with horseback riding. Okay. So it's kind of arbitrary, but you know, some kids like horseback riding, some kids don't. So let's kind of put that about here for now. For me recently, I've started horseback riding, so I didn't realize how much I enjoyed it, and that's kind of why I decided to put that down here today. But I see a lot of kids that get into that. It's a very therapeutic thing for them. It's a way for them to interact with you know, an animal that's 20 times their size, and really puts things into perspective for them. So anyway, you might have some kids that, like, if we expect a lot of, maybe some kids really enjoy that, right? So they have a high, what we expect normal kids to enjoy with that. But then we look over here at autism spectrum, and we may see a less of an interest, right? Because being able to communicate with people and follow directions might be less of an interest for them. Okay. So if we look at soccer, you know, a lot of kids might really enjoy soccer, but a lot of kids don't like soccer, right? I played soccer. I can tell you I was kind of a screwball with soccer. I didn't really take to it too well. But as I got into baseball and other things, I really enjoyed it. But some kids might enjoy soccer or kicking a ball around or playing kickball, right? But this can be a really sociable thing. And we as humans like things that are sociable. However, with children that might have show signs of communication or social skills or even behavioral, we're going to see them a little bit lower because they may not be interested in being sociable at all, right? They're kind of, if it's hard to read emotions and express emotions and have to deal with people to obtain your needs, that might be more of a challenge in some of those skills, right? So really, that's what we see in these two categories, in horse riding and soccer. We might that involve social activities. We might see more of an imbalance here than we would anything else. Okay, so and then how about like playing with blocks? As you know, like a lot of kids really enjoy you know, playing with blocks, and I'd say it's probably pretty common interest for kids, at least of a younger age, and really, so we might see in this case, you know, this might be one of those interesting ones where if it's sociable, we're going to see higher degree of that. Now, working with kids with ASD, and I guess I could have probably put two categories of blocks. If the blocks, like for example, Legos, require instructions, that might be a little bit more difficult, right? Especially if they're intricate instructions. However, if we're talking about like kids just playing with something off on the side with no direction, then we might see this flip up a little bit. Now, but in general, we're going to see children with autism spectrum disorder. They're going to have an interest in something that can be quite a bit more interesting than what we might expect in general. So maybe for somebody with autism spectrum disorder, they really don't show any interest at all in sports, not soccer, not horseback riding, no sports. They aren't really keen on playing with blocks either, but they're really, really into cars, right? Now, why cars? Why do you think cars would be of interest to children with ASD?
Is it the stimuli of the turning,
Could
like how
be, right?
fidget spinners are?
Absolutely. Yep. So the wheels might be, provide some kind of comfort. Okay. What else? They might be able to play by themselves, right? It's nothing that requires any social interaction, right? So they love anything to do with cars. So the interest here we see kind of flip-flop. I guess I could have put them in better order. But anyway, the red is higher than the blue on the cars here because ASD might have a higher interest in cars. But there's pretty much no interest in any of these other hobbies, not even a little bit. They might expect, right? So now trying to decide whether kids' interests are really subjective, they can be really a little subjective and a little hard to figure out. And I remember when I was a kid, I didn't really care about anything other than going out for bike rides and playing with friends. So my level of interest for those things might be way high on some of these as opposed to other kids, right? I kind of grew up in a rural area of Pennsylvania where it was okay for us to just go out after breakfast and go out and build forts in the woods. And, I didn't even see my parents for the entire day until it was time to come home. I think the deal was when the barn lights came on, we had to be at home. So a lot of kids nowadays probably don't have an interest in going to do that. We have a lot of fear that media has really perpetuated of child abduction. So parents are a little bit more clingy to their kids and let them do less on average. I'm not saying everybody. And again, you kind of look at the area you grew up in. Childhood abductions was not a thing that I was thinking about or my parents when I was growing up. So they kind of gave us free reign to do what we wanted. Anyway, so that just kind of illustrates that some of these might be, this is not an accurate depiction. And it's also kind of hard to draw a line when a child is being obsessive or restrictive with their interests too, right? But in general, people with autism spectrum disorder have sort of a restrictiveness with their interests. They might have an activity or two that they're extremely interested in. And we might have back in DSM-4, and I think it is reflected in DSM-5, we have savantism, right? That those are generally people that have ASD, children that have ASD or some variant of ASD that fixate on one area, like maybe playing a violin or piano or something, or drawing or something, right? They have an area that they just really, really excel in, and they're probably way beyond their peers in age group, and even in some cases, even adults. Who is it? The famous cellist, right? Yo-Yo Ma. I think he had extreme abilities at 7 years old. He was playing for the president, right? So, I don't think I could never play to that level as could most people, but that just kind of shows that that repetitive or the restrictive behavior, right? So anyway. So we can really say that people with ASD may have like a repetitive behavior. And what we mean is they need a lot of routine. So maybe a child with autism spectrum disorder really needs to have the exact same meal every day, or the same bedtime rituals, or maybe they have a habit of repeating certain behaviors like lining up toys or repeating certain words. These kind of repetitive behaviors are another sign that we can see oops, I meant to be writing these down. So what let's see, restrictive, emotions and behaviors. and also repetitive behavior. Okay, so we can see somebody that has these repetitive, they have to have certain things over either in a routine, or they can have it like lining up things, okay, or order, put things in a certain order. All right. So these repetitive behaviors are really another sign that we can see restrictive, I'm sorry, behavioral, within the category of behavioral. All right, so let's head over to our last category here. And I'm going to kind of, again, start over. So you can see this would be kind of challenging, especially with repetitive behaviors, because if they like things in a certain order and they're not in a certain order, what tends to happen?
They can get confused or frustrated.
Yeah, frustration, right? Then we go back to communication and social skills, right? So if things aren't in order or they're not in a routine, they are not meeting their needs. And if they can't communicate how to obtain their needs, or read somebody else's emotions, now we might have like a meltdown or a blow up, right? So again, transferring skills, helping the environment, maybe keeping things in order for the child for the most part, picking the battles and saying, okay, if you need your shoes lined up a certain way, that might be okay. We can do that. And at the same time, we're going to maybe introduce some kind of change, seeing how they can accept change a little bit better through communication skills if they have them. Okay. So our last category here is environmental stimuli. Now, what do I mean by that? So I'm going to draw another graph. And I like kind of making these graphs here. So on our x-axis, we're going to have strength of stimuli. Okay, and then you'll see what I mean here in a second. We'll make our y-axis responses to stimuli. All right, and then and that's how the child is going to respond to the stimuli. So maybe we'll make a low strength stimuli. Let's see. So this will be low. This will be high. And likewise, this will be high. All right. So maybe our low strength stimuli might be something as a dim light. That would be like a low strength stimuli, right? It doesn't really excite too many people. A lot of people might not even notice the low light, right? And something a little bit stronger might be like a noise, maybe like we'll say car horn. We'll just say a horn, or maybe even a siren or something like that, car horn. So a car honking, and we'll kind of put that down as a high strength stimuli. Might be somebody gives them a hug or squeezes, right? We'll put like squeeze. Now again, this is going to be varying for different people. This is not all inclusive, but it might some people might adapt a little bit better to lighter hugs than heavier hugs. Somebody might not like to be touched at all. So these go from low to high, as you can see, with dim light to actually being physically touched or squeezed, right, by another person. So we probably expect to see a kid respond to at least this low dim light, our low strength stimuli, and then respond a little bit more to medium. So we'll kind of just look at low response to dim light, And for many of us, actually what I could probably do here is do what's expected of people, let's do that actually. I think I like that idea. So kind of what we did for the other one, what we expect for normal people that don't have ASD. Sorry, I did not mean normal, but normally functioning without signs, features of ASD, and then what we might see for ASD, right? So dim light, we can say probably all of us would be about the same level, not affect too many people. Now here's where we kind of see things dichotomized. Now horns are designed to really affect us, right? They give us a warning that something is happening, right? So for most people without features of ASD, we're going to see a little bit of an increase to response to stimuli, but for the most part, pretty normal. Okay. They're not going to jump up and get upset or get frustrated or anything. Some of us might, again, some people might be sensitive to that, but for children with ASD, we're going to see a sharp increase in response to that. Okay. Compared to somebody that does not have features of ASD. And likewise, if somebody comes up, like a stranger comes up and gives us a hug, kind of put yourself in this position. Say you're at Walmart or Target or something, somebody comes up to give you a hug. That might be a weird experience for you, right? For just about everybody, I know I'd be a little freaked out by that, but for somebody, even if they know the person that comes up and gives them a hug, that could be really a terrifying or frustrating event for them. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that hugs are the extreme for most people, but it turns out for a lot of kids with ASD, they don't necessarily like to follow this line. So some weak stimuli really, really bother them, and some of their responses would be kind of up there, like a strong stimuli. But, so really, I think what I can do is just sum this up. So environmental stimuli, we just see like an amplified response to normal stimuli. Okay. What I meant by normal stimuli is just stimuli that normally doesn't evoke high frustration, high anger, or high excitability in most other people. Now, I do want to add, there are going to be different factors here, and just because somebody shows signs of these does not necessarily mean that they fall along the ASD. We can also look at cultural differences, right? So maybe a child that comes from a rural area that has never really, they're introduced into maybe Philadelphia. They move from farmland, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or maybe even New York. So sirens and cars honking and all this extra stimuli that's happening around them might frustrate that child, might produce some excitability in them. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they fall along the spectrum of ASD. It just could be some kind of acculturation. And same way with people that come from overseas, right? Maybe from some Eastern cultures, they might not understand, sirens blaring or tornado warnings or something like that. It might be very terrifying for them as well. So anyway, there are a lot of factors that can go into that, but for the most part, when we look at ASD, we do look at these three key signs, which is communication, behavioral, and environmental stimuli. Okay. Any questions on ASD? Does anybody have any comments or maybe any examples that you've also seen that might fall along what I talked about here?
My older brother, he has Asperger's syndrome. So I remember when we were little, I would always sit next to him and put my head on his shoulder, and he would start moving around a lot. So then I'd lift my head off, and then he'd be fine. And I remember bringing it up to him like recently, and he said, well, I didn't like being touched. So when he comes to give me a hug now, I feel like a little like weird about it, because he never used to hug me when we were little, and I'm a very affectionate person. So now like he'll try to like give me hugs now that we're older and everything like that. So I'm like, okay, I appreciate this more, but it's a little weird because we never did this.
Yeah. Okay. So it's something that he was trying to overcome and get through, is providing more hugs, right? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Nayeli. And you know, that kind of speaks to, again, going back, Asperger's is really a sociable. We see more independence. We see really everything in these three key signs we see on low end of the scale. So it's they are higher functioning. They do tend to hold, people with Asperger's do tend to hold jobs. They may have difficulty relating to their bosses or something like that, but communication and instructions and seeing bigger pictures might be a problem for them. But for the most part, you know, they are higher functioning. So. But in his case, it sounds like your brother probably knew the best way to get what you want is through communication, and communication might involve shaking hands or hugs or something like that, right? So that's something that he adapted over time to, which is great. Any other examples? Anybody else care to share any of their experiences, either somebody they've known or anything like that? Okay. All right. So if there are no more questions, I am going to go ahead and stop recording. That's really all that I have